Let's talk about a perfectly competitive market by using public transit as an example. But before we get to our example, we should go over a few key background points. Transportation is a derived demand, meaning transportation itself has no value unless you pair it with an activity you as the individual want to do. For example, you take an e-scooter because you want to go to the library to study. Supply is the total amount of a specific good or service that is available to individuals. During a perfectly competitive market, the consumer knows all the information about the product being sold and all the prices from the companies. This allows the consumer to be in charge of the market. They have the power to set the prices. Although businesses cannot influence the prices of the product, they can leave or enter the market without cost. While in this state, the value derived from traveling will be the same as the cost for supplying the travel. On the graph, we can see the relationship between the demand curve, the orange line, and the supply curve, the purple line. The demand curve is also known as the marginal benefit curve, while the supply curve can also be referred to as the marginal cost curve. The point where the supply curve and the demand curve meet is called the break-even point. At this point is when a business is not making or losing any money. Usually, all private businesses operate on the right side of this break-even point, so they can make a profit. Since roads cannot be built for one person and transit is for the mass public, where do we operate on the supply-demand graph if our intention is to maximize social welfare? As transportation engineers, we mainly work in the public sector. Therefore, we operate on the left side of the break-even point of the graph. Our main goal is not to make a profit, but to make transportation accessible by making it affordable. Now, let's visualize an example. Let's say we have a population of people in a city. These people demanded 100 e-scooters to help with making transit around the city more affordable. In our first example, let's say we are able to supply the 100 e-scooters demanded by the population. So what does that look like in our graph? Because we have enough supply for the demand, let's say we set the price for an e-scooter ride as the equilibrium price. If we do this, we can see the total benefit to the people in the city will be this area below the demand curve from the beginning of the curve to the break-even point. Consumer surplus, this part here on the graph, is the difference between what the individuals in the city are okay with paying and what they actually do pay to use the e-scooters. The graph also shows producer surplus. Producer surplus is the difference between what the individuals pay to use the e-scooters and the costs it takes for the city to provide a certain number of e-scooters. Producer surplus varies based on the amount of the product a business has to provide. When you add consumer and producer surplus together, we get total surplus. Total surplus measures how prosperous the market is. For us, we can see the total amount of social welfare we are providing to the city's population by supplying the 100 e-scooters they demanded. At the equilibrium point is when social and economic welfare are maximized. But what if we supplied 200 e-scooters to the city even though we only had a demand for 100? What does that do to our social welfare? If we provided too many scooters, we would have a situation where costs exceed the benefits. This area of the graph represents the loss in social welfare we would experience because it would lead to a decrease in the total surplus of the market. This hiccup in our market is called a deadweight loss. Now let's say we could only get 50 e-scooters to the city. What does that do? While we still experience loss in social welfare, if we underproduce e-scooters for our city, we actually have potential incremental welfare that goes unrealized. In a perfectly competitive market, over or underproduction can happen if taxes are raised or if monopolies begin appearing. But whether we overproduce or underproduce the number of scooters in our city, we definitely are not maximizing the social welfare felt in the market, which is what we should be doing.